Now Jack Hughes puts it around McCarr. United States with numbers. Back across it comes. Jack Hughes wins it. The golden goal for the United States. For the first time since the 1980 miracle, the United States takes the gold.
Kenny Albert with the call, did a wonderful job. Mike Tirico hosting. It was just a gold medal performance all around yesterday. And it was at this time, 24 hours ago, Canada and the United States, second period tied at 1-1. And if you look at the totality of this, if you were actually judging this like it was figure skating, then you would go, oh, Canada, they won. But we don't judge it that way. We judge it with the bottom line of goals. And you might say, wait a minute, what's happening in overtime? It was 3-on-3. They do that during the regular season in the NHL because they're playing so many minutes, so many games, and once you get to overtime, it's basically their version of a 3-on-3 shootout. And now, do I like it in the Olympics? I did not. This is for the gold medal. This isn't, hey, you got another game tomorrow night in Toronto and then one in New York. This is the Olympic gold medal. But the United States and Canada both had 3 men on the ice against one another, and the United States ended up winning, of course. Here's John Cooper, the Canadian head coach. Here comes the question first.
How did you see the whole play that led to the goal?
Overtime's overtime. You take 4 players off the ice. Now hockey's not hockey anymore. There's a reason overtime and shootouts are in play. It's all TV driven and, to end games, so there's not, a long time. There's a reason it's not in the Stanley Cup finals or playoffs because, it gets ended in 5. But it's still skilled players out there making skill plays. And the U.S. team has some skilled players, and, as do we. And they made one more play than we did in overtime.
So that's the head coach for Canada, John Cooper. Look, he can be right, but also be critiqued in this situation because they had plenty of chances to win that. Were they the better team? Yeah, they probably were the better team, but and maybe they performed better. But the United States performed better when they needed to, and that was at the very end. All it takes, when you get to that point, anything can happen. And a lot of times it can be something fluky. And it didn't feel like anything was really starting to metastasize there for the United States on that play. You're going, okay, and then it's over. And, you start to think back 1980 when, the United States beat the Soviet Union. That wasn't for the gold. And it doesn't seem like it was 46 years ago, by the way, 1980. But those are a bunch of guys who weren't playing in the NHL. I mean, that was their moment. Some guys played in the NHL, but these were college kids going against professionals. It's different now. These are professionals against professionals. So does it have the same feel? No. But it still feels pretty good when you're watching and how that played out. And then Jack Hughes, man, with teeth missing and a flag around his neck and a gold medal as well. And he talked about scoring the winner.
This was such an incredible game to grind out. I mean, you're bleeding right through it just looking at you right now. Can you just talk about how difficult this gold medal was to win?
Unbelievable game by Hellebuck. He was our best player tonight by a mile. Unbelievable game. Unreal game by our team. That's just a ballsy, gutsy win. That's American hockey right there. That's a great Canadian team, but we're USA. We're so proud to be Americans. Tonight was all for the country.
You couldn't script it. In fact, if you tried to script it, somebody would say, all right, let's ease off. The guy loses his teeth, okay? All right. Because he did, nearly cost him his team with a bad penalty there in the third period. But that photo is going to live on for the rest of our lives, where you just see him smiling with his teeth cracked. And just, it meant something. This is pride. Now, you can talk about the Stanley Cup, and Fritzy even said, hey, what would be more important, winning the Stanley Cup or the gold medal? And I think it's an interesting question. It might be one of those where you don't want to say it publicly. Hey, the Stanley Cup might be more important than winning a gold medal, because that's a team and a city as opposed to a country. But, that might depend on what team, what city, what country we're talking about. Yeah, Seton?
I know in soccer, there's nothing more important than the World Cup. That is the pinnacle, right? That is like the end. I don't know if the Olympics, the soccer is also in the Olympics. So it's not exactly the same, like an apples to apples comparison, World Cup to an Olympic medal. But there is something about playing for your country that's obviously a really, really big deal.
Yeah, and you saw that, just the pride that they had. And, Jack Hughes saying it over and over, proud to be an American, did acknowledge the Canadian team. Canadian team had a lot of talent. They really did. But, you're just kind of hoping that the United States stays close. And then they get the first goal and you go, okay, that sent a message, and really quickly. And then Canada comes back, and then it was going to come down to, is somebody going to get a fluke goal or maybe a fluke save? Because Connor was unbelievable. Like, there's moments where you go, how did that happen? How did he make that save? And this is where they talk about a goalie standing on his head. For Mike Eruzione, you needed Jim Craig as your goaltender. And Jack Hughes needed Hellebuck to get into overtime for him to have that, because those are really the biggest plays. If you don't have a save on, there's like 3 of them. I mean, Canada had 5-on-3 for a while and didn't do anything. And you could see they had more talent out there. But you get to that point where all of a sudden you start to tense up. You miss shots that you would normally make. And this, I remember when the United States beat the Soviet Union. And there were some hockey purists that said, hey, if they played 10 times, Soviets are winning the next 9. But they don't play 10 times. Nope. That's the point. Of all of the great upsets, if Villanova plays Georgetown again in basketball, or NC State against Houston, but they don't. They played once, and that's all you needed to. And the women's hockey team, USA, now they were favored against Canada, and that turned out to be a lot better game than I thought it was going to be. But it was a fun weekend. It was fun to be able to watch it, and it was early morning, and this is what the Olympics does. The Olympics will bring in the casual fan or the non-fan. And now you're watching moments like this. It's the one thing that all these sports try to chase. Like, how do you get this? It's scarce. And the Olympics still is able to deliver that. And you saw that yesterday on display.